The holographic display bathed Keithrak's scaled face in an eerie red glow. His four eyes blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of the impossible data streaming across the screen. Warning icons popped up faster than he could dismiss them. "This can't be right," he muttered, his talons clicking against the control panel. The sensor readings showed hundreds, no thousands, of ships appearing out of nowhere near Outpost Zeta 9. Each new contact made his heart beat faster. The emergency channel crackled with desperate voices. "We're under attack. Unknown fleet configuration. Wait, they're The transmission cut off in a burst of static, leaving only the soft hum of failing systems. The station's AI remained silent despite his repeated commands. Keithrak slammed his fist on the console, leaving small dents in the metal. "Computer, activate defense protocols." Nothing. Not even an error message. A high-priority transmission pushed through the interference. Counselor Myra Terrell's hologram flickered to life, her usually perfect composure cracking. Her ceremonial headpiece was askew. "Station Commander Keithrak, explain how our systems were breached now." "Counselor, Keithrak's throat went dry as another screen lit up with alerts. The Drachnids had torn through their most advanced firewalls like wet paper. Years of security upgrades meant nothing. They've developed something new, something that makes our AI defenses useless. "Impossible," Terrell hissed, her scales flaring with anger. "Our systems were," Keithrak corrected, watching in horror as system after system went dark. Defense grids, communication arrays, weapon platforms, all dead. "We're superior." The station's lights flickered, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Communication channels started dropping one by one, like stars winking out. Through the observation window, Keithrak spotted movement, a massive section of the Drachnid fleet breaking away from the massacre at Zeta 9. His blood turned to ice as he tracked their new heading, straight toward human space. He knew what that meant. The humans would be caught completely off guard. The emergency lights kicked in, bathing the command center in darkness. The soft red glow made everything look like it was covered in blood. As Keithrak struggled to make sense of the chaos unfolding around him, the emergency comm panel flickered to life with an unfamiliar signal. The station's main systems were failing, but one transmission cut through the static, an urgent diplomatic message from the Human Federation. His talons hesitated over the controls. Trusting humans had never been part of Valdorian doctrine, but with every second wasted, more of his people perished. The emergency comm system pinged, displaying an unexpected origin, a human diplomatic channel. Keithrak hesitated before accepting the transmission, his scaled fingers hovering over the control panel as ancestral warnings about human duplicity echoed in his mind. "This is Diplomat Adisa of the United Human Federation," a calm voice announced. "We've detected large-scale attacks in your space. Under Article 7, Section 12 of the Peace Accord, we're offering immediate emergency assistance. Our ships are already mobilized." Keithrak's fellow officials erupted in protests, their neck frills flaring with alarm. "Humans? They'll use this to spy on us." Senior Observer Vexit spat, pounding his fist on the console. In the background of Adisa's transmission, a sharp voice cut through. "I want strike teams ready in 5 minutes. Load up the heavy gear and don't forget the shield generators this time." "Commander Delgado," Adisa interrupted smoothly. "Perhaps we could discuss deployment options after..." "After what?" "While they debate, people are dying." Delgado's voice grew closer to the comm, filled with raw urgency. "With respect, we need boots on the ground now. Every minute we waste is another life lost." The Valdorian command center fell silent, the usual background chatter dying away. Keithrak had never heard anyone speak so directly about combat. It wasn't diplomatic. It wasn't proper. It was downright barbaric. Yet something about that directness struck a chord deep within him. "The humans cannot be trusted," Vexit insisted, mandibles clicking with agitation. "Their aggressive nature." Another explosion rocked the station, sending warning lights flickering across the chamber. 3 more systems went dark on the display, their signals snuffed out like candles in a storm. Your rescue ships would need to cross the treaty line, Kathrak said to Adisa, trying to keep his voice steady despite the tremors running through his body. Yes. Article 7 allows for emergency crossing during large-scale attacks. We have ships ready and waiting at the border. In the background, Delgado continued barking orders. I want med teams and combat engineers on every transport. Move it, and pack extra supplies. We don't know what we'll find out there. Kathrak's hands shook as he looked at his fellow officials. Their faces showed fear, pride, and uncertainty, a mirror of his own internal struggle. More emergency signals flashed across the screens, more calls for help, more lives hanging in the balance. He made his decision. Taking a deep breath, Kathrak entered his security codes and transmitted the authorization. Permission granted, Diplomat Adisa. May the stars guide your path. As the words left his mouth, he wondered if he'd just saved his people, or doomed them. As Kathrak relayed the emergency clearance to the human envoy, his station's fragile comms stabilized just enough to patch a direct feed to the Federation's upper command. Meanwhile, far from the burning outposts aboard the UHF battleship Frontier's Edge, Admiral Joe reviewed the emergency protocols, ensuring that every action remained within the strict technicalities of the peace treaty. War was coming, officially or not, but the Federation would be prepared. The emergency comm system pinged, displaying Admiral Joe's stern face across the bridge's main screen. Her dark eyes scanned the assembled officers, including Commander Delgado and Diplomat Adisa. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Begin Operation Watchdog, Joe ordered, her voice steady as steel. Activate all sleeper units. This is not a drill. Across human space, dozens of seemingly ordinary merchant ships transformed like butterflies emerging from cocoons. Hidden weapon ports slid open with well-oiled precision. Armored panels shifted into place with barely a sound. Cargo holds that had carried grain and minerals for years converted into fighter bays filled with waiting warcraft. Kathrak's image appeared on a side screen, his alien features frozen in shock as he watched the feed. His third eye blinked rapidly in disbelief. Impossible, he whispered. Those vessels passed every inspection. We checked them hundreds of times. Trade restrictions forced us to get creative, Admiral Joe explained, allowing herself a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Your people's contempt for our primitive engineering helped. No one looked too closely at our cargo haulers. They were too busy laughing at our outdated designs. Commander Delgado pulled up a tactical display, her fingers dancing across the controls. Strike groups are forming up, Admiral. The merchant fleet conversion is at 85% and climbing. Those rust buckets clean up nice. This is unprecedented, Kathrak said, mandibles twitching. The level of planning, the deception. We never imagined. We've been preparing for something like this for decades, Joe replied. The Federation never trusted the peace would last forever. We just hoped we wouldn't need to reveal our hand so soon. Diplomat Adisa stepped forward, her face tight with concern. Admiral, the Confederation Council will see this as proof they were right about us. We'll be labeled as deceptive warmongers. Everything we've worked for. With respect, Diplomat, Joe turned to face her, voice firm but not unkind. There are Valdorian civilians dying right now. I won't let political considerations stop us from helping them. Some things matter more than appearances. The Drachnid fleet is targeting civilian centers first, Kathrak reported, his voice shaking. Our defensive networks, they're failing everywhere. Millions are already dead. Commander Delgado, status of the fleet? Joe asked, straightening her shoulders. Ready to move, Admiral. All ships report combat-ready status. The crews are itching for a fight. Admiral Joe straightened her uniform and looked directly at Kathrak's image. Your people may hate us for hiding our strength, but we're about to prove there's a difference between being warriors and being barbarians. We're coming to help whether you want us to or not. She turned to face the bridge crew, her expression hard as granite. "Launch all vessels across the treaty line. Time to make good on our barbaric reputation. Let's show them what humans can really do." With the last formalities exchanged, the Federation fleet broke formation and surged across the treaty line. On the Valdorian scanners, the seemingly unarmed human ships shifted, defensive plates sliding, weapon systems activating, and fighter bays coming to life. Kithrak watched, stunned. The humans had been hiding their strength for years, and now, in the battered remains of Confederation space, they were revealing just enough to show that the rules of war had changed. Kithrak watched through the flickering holofeed as the human fleet moved with surprising grace. Their ships, now stripped of their merchant disguises, formed up into attack patterns he'd never seen before. The vessels seemed to dance through space, their movements both efficient and unpredictable. "Drachnid wing incoming," Commander Delgado announced, her voice tight but controlled. "Their electronic warfare suite is attempting to penetrate our systems. They're hitting us with everything they've got." Admiral Jo allowed herself a small smile. "Let them try." She stood at her command station, hands clasped behind her back, radiating quiet confidence. The Drachnid ships, sleek and deadly, launched their first attack, a barrage of system-killing programs meant to disable their targets. But instead of the expected devastation, the human ships continued their advance without hesitation. The enemy's most sophisticated cyber weapons seemed to slide off their defenses like water off a duck's back. "Ma'am," Dr. Lazarus called out from his station, "they're attempting to override our targeting systems with advanced protocols. Our analog backups are holding perfectly. Looks like old school beats new school today." Kithrak leaned forward in his chair, ignoring the sparks from a damaged console nearby. The humans were using technology that seemed primitive by Confederation standards. Yet somehow it was working. Their apparent technological disadvantage had transformed into an unexpected strength. "All ships execute pattern Delta 7, Delgado commanded. The human fleet split into 3 groups, each taking different vectors toward the Drachnid formation. "Launching kinetic packages now." Her fingers flew across her tactical display, coordinating the complex dance of ships and weapons. The Drachnid ships, clearly confused by their failed electronic warfare, scattered to avoid the incoming fire. Their formation broke apart as Delgado's forces pressed the attack from multiple angles. What had started as an organized assault was quickly becoming a chaotic retreat. "By the ancestors," one of the surviving Valdorian captains whispered over the comm. "Their ships, they're so fast. How are they moving like that?" Kithrak watched in amazement as human vessels performed tight maneuvers that should have been impossible for their size. The Drachnid raiders, used to dealing with Confederation vessels, couldn't match their unpredictable attack patterns. Every time they tried to counter, the humans had already shifted to a new formation. "Target their lead ship," Jo ordered. "Show them we mean business." Her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Multiple human vessels concentrated their fire on the Drachnid flagship. Their weapons, a mix of railguns, missiles, and energy weapons, overwhelmed its shields. The massive ship listed to one side, venting atmosphere. Secondary explosions rippled along its hull. The remaining Drachnid vessels, faced with an enemy they couldn't electronically disable or outmaneuver, began to pull back. Their retreat was hasty, almost panicked. Several ships bumped into each other in their rush to escape. "They're running," Delgado announced, a note of satisfaction in her voice. "Guess they didn't expect us to hit back so hard." Admiral Jo nodded, then addressed all channels. "Begin search and rescue operations. I want every survivor in this sector found and brought to safety. No one gets left behind, human or Valdorian. Let's show them what humanity stands for." Kithrak watched as the human fleet spread out, already moving to protect and aid the damaged Confederation outposts. He had never seen anything like it. This perfect blend of martial skill and compassionate action. Perhaps he realized he had been wrong about humans all along. As the battlefield quieted, the true weight of the devastation settled in. Wounded civilians and soldiers alike drifted in the wreckage, their distress signals barely detectable over the lingering electronic interference. Without hesitation, human medical ships cut through the debris field, deploying triage teams to assist the Valdorian survivors. Kithrak found himself aboard a Federation vessel for the first time, surrounded not by conquering warriors but by medics working tirelessly to save lives. Kithrak stepped onto the human vessel frontier's edge, his legs unsteady from the hasty evacuation. The ship's interior wasn't the crude, utilitarian design he'd expected. Instead, he found himself in a well-lit medical bay where human crews worked alongside makeshift Valdorian medical stations. The air hummed with activity, and the sweet, sharp smell of disinfectant filled his nostrils. Dr. Lazarus hunched over a wounded Valdorian officer, his fingers dancing across a modified medical scanner. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he worked. "The auto-medic units aren't compatible," he muttered, then turned to his assistant. "Get me the analog diagnostic kit. We'll do this the old-fashioned way." His weathered hands never stopped moving as he spoke. Observer Kithrak, Diplomat Adisa approached, her voice warm but tired. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed long hours of work. "We've received new directives from Counselor Terrell. She insists we need formal clearance before proceeding with additional rescues." The wounded Valdorian officer spoke up from his bed, his voice weak and trembling. "But there are dozens more survivors out there. Our escape pods won't last much longer." Kithrak felt shame burn in his chest as he watched Dr. Lazarus successfully stabilize another of his people, work that their own advanced medical AI had failed to accomplish. The human doctor had simply adapted using basic tools and intuition where high technology had fallen short. It went against everything Kithrak had been taught about human capabilities. "Your people are dying," Adisa said softly, her eyes meeting Kithrak's. Her gaze held no judgment, only determination. "We can help, but we need your support to override these protocols." Around them, human medical staff moved with purpose, treating Valdorian wounded with the same care they'd show their own. One nurse held a frightened Valdorian child's hand, speaking soothing words despite the language barrier. Another crew member had removed his jacket to cover a shivering survivor, rubbing their shoulders to generate warmth. These weren't the actions of savages. Kithrak thought of all the reports he'd written about human aggression, their primitive emotions. Now he watched those same emotions drive humans to save his people without hesitation. Every assumption he'd made seemed to crumble before his eyes. "Counselor Terrell," Kithrak activated his comm, his voice firm with newfound conviction. "I must insist we suspend standard diplomatic requirements. These humans are—" A sharp alarm cut through the medical bay, its wail making everyone flinch. Emergency signals flashed on multiple screens, showing new Drachnid attack formations pushing deeper into Confederation space. The red warning lights cast ominous shadows across worried faces, both human and Valdorian alike. Even as the wounded were tended to, the crisis was far from over. In the Valdorian capital, the Confederation's High Council convened in an emergency session. Counselor Terrell, usually so composed, stood before the chamber with the weight of extinction pressing on her shoulders. The Drachnid fleet had advanced faster than anyone expected, and now, with her people's defenses crumbling, she had no choice but to listen as a human admiral, a representative of the very species they had sought to control, spoke of survival. The emergency council chamber aboard the Valdorian diplomatic vessel hummed with tension. The air felt thick enough to cut. Counselor Myra Terrell's hologram towered over the gathering, her usually perfect composure cracking under strain. Her hands kept fidgeting with her ceremonial sash, a telling break from Valdorian custom. "Admiral Joe, we require your fleet's immediate deployment to our core systems," she declared, her voice tight. "In exchange, the Confederation will grant Earth expanded trade rights and lift several key restrictions." Admiral Joe stood firm, hands clasped behind her back, her weathered face showing no reaction. "With respect, Counselor, we're already moving to protect your people. No bargaining needed. That's what allies do. Cathrak watched the exchange from his position among the Valdorian officials, noting every subtle shift in body language. The contrast between Tyrell's rigid formality and Joe's direct approach couldn't have been starker. It made him deeply uncomfortable. "You misunderstand," Tyrell pressed, her hologram leaning forward. "We demand your forces operate under Confederation command protocols." "If I may interrupt," Diplomat Adisa stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. She smoothed her Federation dress uniform with practiced grace. "The treaty's restriction zone has already been violated by the Drachnid advance. The quarantine agreement is effectively void. We all know this." Commander Delgado, monitoring from a corner terminal, allowed herself a small smile at the diplomat's shrewd observation. She whispered something to her aide about fancy words winning battles. "That's—" Tyrell faltered, her massive hologram flickering. "That's not relevant to the current crisis." "On the contrary," Admiral Joe said, "it means we can act freely to defend both our peoples. But understand this, my fleet will operate under Federation command. We've trained for this. We know what we're doing, and frankly, we're your best shot." The Valdorian council members shifted uncomfortably in their ornate chairs. Their ceremonial robes rustled like nervous birds. One elder spoke up, his voice quavering. "But our tactical protocols have failed against the Drachnid assault," Joe cut in, her tone sharp but not unkind. "I'm offering to help save your worlds, but I won't risk my people's lives by following outdated procedures. Time is running out." Cathrak stepped forward, feeling every eye in the room turn to him. "Counselor Tyrell, I've witnessed the humans in action. Their methods are unconventional, but effective. We must adapt or perish." Tyrell's hologram flickered as she struggled with the decision. The safety of billions hung in the balance. Finally, her shoulders dropped slightly, a shocking display of vulnerability from a Valdorian leader. "Very well, Admiral. Proceed as you see fit. Cathrak will serve as our liaison aboard your vessel." "Plot a course for the Valdorian home systems," Joe ordered, turning to her bridge crew. Her voice carried the weight of command. "Maximum speed. We'll show these Drachnids what happens when they threaten our allies. No one picks on our friends and gets away with it." Cathrak gathered his observation equipment, preparing to transfer to the human flagship. As he watched Admiral Joe issue rapid-fire orders, he realized that the Confederation's careful plans and protocols meant nothing now. Their survival rested in the hands of the very species they had tried so hard to contain. The irony was not lost on him. With reluctant approval from the Confederation Council, human warships initiated a full-speed jump toward the Valdorian core systems. Aboard the frontier's edge, Cathrak retreated to a quiet corner, his mind racing. He had spent his career monitoring humanity's rise, dismissing them as reckless and undisciplined. Now, as he recorded his latest observations in his official log, he felt the first stirrings of doubt about everything he once believed. Cathrak walked beside Dr. Lazarus through the human flagship's research bay, his eyes widening at row after row of equipment that looked deceptively simple. The massive room hummed with activity as technicians worked at stations that seemed almost primitive compared to Valdorian standards. These systems, Cathrak gestured at what appeared to be outdated targeting computers, their displays showing basic green text against black screens. "They're intentionally basic?" Lazarus smiled, adjusting his glasses with an air of quiet pride. "Not basic, reliable. We learned to build weapons that can't be hacked or jammed. While your people pushed toward pure AI, we kept humans in the loop. Sometimes the old ways work best." "But the treaty limited your military development," Cathrak said, running a finger along one of the metal consoles. "It limited obvious weapons," Lazarus replied, leading them past banks of machinery. "So we got creative. Every civilian ship we built had hidden weapon mounts. Every trade station doubled as a potential fortress. We knew something was coming. We just didn't know what. You could say we're masters of hiding things in plain sight." Commander Delgado joined them, her boots clicking on the deck plates. The sound echoed through the bay. "We've been ready for years," she said, leaning against a workbench and crossing her arms. "I remember my first combat drop. Pirates hit one of our outer colonies. Everyone expected us to call for Valdorian help." Her eyes grew distant, focusing on some point in the past. "Instead, we handled it ourselves. Lost good people that day, but we protected our own. That's what humans do. We fight for what matters, even when it hurts, even when no one's watching." Kethrak noticed how Delgado's hand unconsciously touched an old scar on her neck, the pale mark stark against her skin. The gesture spoke volumes about the human willingness to bear pain for a greater cause. "Your computers are amazing," Lazarus admitted, gesturing at the equipment around them. "But they're also your weakness. The Drachnids found a way through those perfect defenses because they're too perfect, too predictable. Sometimes you need a dash of chaos to win." Before Kethrak could respond, the ship's speakers crackled with static. Multiple Drachnid signatures detected, 3 Valdorian worlds under heavy assault. This is not a drill. "Battle stations." Admiral Joe's voice cut through the air like a knife. Warning lights bathed the bay in red as crew members rushed to their posts, their movements practiced and precise despite the sudden chaos. The transition to FTL was smooth, but the moment the fleet arrived, the grim reality of war hit them like a tidal wave. The Valdorian core planets shimmered with the blue glow of their faltering planetary shields, each impact from Drachnid weapons sending ripples through the energy field. Human ships accelerated into battle formation, their unorthodox tactics already confounding enemy sensors. This was no longer a rescue mission. It was a war to determine the fate of an entire species. Kethrak stood on the bridge of the human flagship, watching Admiral Joe's calm demeanor as she studied the tactical display. The Drachnid fleet hung like a dark cloud over the Valdorian worlds, their ships forming an intimidating blockade that stretched across the stars like a wall of death. "Battle groups assume formation Delta," Joe commanded, her voice steady as steel. "Commander Delgado, take your wing around their flank. They'll be looking for standard approach vectors. Give them something they've never seen before." "Copy that, Admiral," Delgado responded, her excitement barely contained. "My crews are ready to show these Drachnids what happens when you rely too heavily on computers. We'll hit them where it hurts." Kethrak observed as the human fleet split apart with practiced ease. Their movements seemed random, almost chaotic to his trained eye, like leaves scattered in a storm. "Admiral, your attack pattern appears disorganized, almost reckless." Joe smiled, a knowing glint in her eyes. "That's exactly the point. Their AI can't predict what it can't understand. Sometimes the best strategy is no strategy at all." The Drachnid response came swiftly. Waves of electronic warfare pulses washed over the human ships, the same devastating attacks that had crippled Valdorian defenses. The energy bursts lit up space like silent lightning, but the human vessels pressed forward completely unaffected. "Their jamming attempts are failing," Kethrak noted, unable to hide his amazement. His antennae twitched with growing interest. "Can't hack analog backup systems." Delgado's voice crackled over the comm, filled with smug satisfaction. "Sometimes the old ways work best. Grandpa's radio still works when the power's out, you know." The main view screen lit up as Counselor Tyrell's face appeared, her expression tense and drawn. "Admiral Joe, our ground-based defense platforms are coming back online. We require coordination to avoid friendly fire," Joe finished, nodding sharply. "Understood, Counselor. Link your targeting data to our tactical net. Commander Delgado's group is about to clear you a firing solution. Trust us." Tyrell's jaw tightened, but she nodded, clearly swallowing her pride. "Very well. Sending targeting data now. Don't make me regret this." Delgado's battle group struck from an impossible angle, their weapons blazing through the darkness of space. The Drachnid ships, caught off guard by the unorthodox approach, scattered in confusion like startled fish. Their formation broke apart as they tried to adapt to the humans' seemingly random attack patterns, their mighty fleet suddenly looking less impressive. "Ground batteries, fire at will," Joe ordered as gaps appeared in the Drachnid line, her voice sharp and clear. Keithrak watched in awe as Valdorian defense platforms joined the assault, their powerful weapons finding marks through the holes created by human tactics. The Drachnid blockade began to crumble, their once perfect formation dissolving into chaos. "They're pulling back," Delgado reported, satisfaction evident in her voice. "Should we pursue? We've got them running scared." "Negative," Joe replied, studying the tactical display intently, her fingers drumming on the console. "Hold position and maintain defense of the Valdorian platforms." Her eyes narrowed as she tracked the retreating enemy ships. This was too easy. Their main force is still out there, watching and learning. This was just a test. The bridge crew continued their work as the last Drachnid ships disappeared beyond the system's edge, fading into the vast darkness. Keithrak noticed how none of the humans celebrated. Their faces remained focused, alert, ready. They knew this was just the beginning of a much longer fight. The Drachnid forces had been repelled, for now. As emergency crews scrambled across the battered Valdorian homeworld, Admiral Joe called for an urgent war council. Humans and Valdorians alike gathered in the fortified war chamber, holographic projections of the battlefield still flickering with unresolved threats. The time for protocol was over. If their alliance had any hope of survival, they needed a plan that neither species could have conceived alone. Keithrak watched as Admiral Joe laid out the battle plans on the main display. The holographic images showed Valdorian ships highlighted in red, their weak points exposed by the Drachnid attacks. Small warning markers blinked at key spots where enemy weapons had torn through their best defenses like paper. The damage patterns told a clear story, one that made his antennae twitch with worry. "Your automated systems are being turned against you," Joe explained, her voice firm but understanding. "We need to install manual backups, physical firing controls, and direct interface overrides. Think of it like having a spare key when you're locked out of your house. Without these backups, you're completely stuck when things go wrong." Counselor Terrell's face twisted with disgust on the view screen, his scales darkened to a deep purple, almost black with rage. "You expect us to downgrade our vessels? To replace our advanced computers with mechanical parts? This is madness. We might as well go back to using steam engines."
"With respect, Counselor," Dr. Lazarus cut in, adjusting his glasses nervously. "Your advanced systems are exactly what makes you vulnerable. The Drachnids have found a way to hack and disable them completely. We've seen it happen 3 times now. Each time the results were devastating."
Keithrak stepped forward, his heart heavy but determined. His antennae drooped with the weight of his next words. "Counselor, I've seen it firsthand. Our finest ships were rendered useless in seconds. The humans' hybrid approach might be our only chance. We can't afford to let pride blind us to solutions." "What you're suggesting goes against centuries of progress," another Valdorian official protested, banging his fist on his desk hard enough to make his own screen shake. "Our ancestors would be ashamed." Diplomat Adisa raised her hand calmly, her steady presence cutting through the tension. "We understand this is difficult. But consider this. We're not asking you to abandon your technology. We're adding layers of protection, fail-safes that can't be hacked because they operate on basic physical principles, like having both an electronic lock and a deadbolt. Both have their place." "The choice is yours," Joe added, crossing her arms and letting out a tired sigh. "But every minute we delay gives the Drachnids more time to press their advantage. They won't wait while we debate. They're probably planning their next attack right now." Keithrak shared battle footage from the recent engagement, the screens filled with images of Valdorian ships spinning helplessly as their systems went dark, their crews trapped inside like bugs in a jar. "Look at how easily they bypassed our defenses. Yet the human ships, with their primitive systems, stood firm. They kept fighting while we drifted." Terrell's shoulders slumped slightly. His scales shifted to a paler shade, showing the first signs of acceptance. "If we agree to these modifications, who would oversee them? I won't have humans running wild through our ships. Joint teams, Adisa suggested, offering a reassuring smile. Your engineers working alongside ours. Full transparency, shared control. We succeed or fail together. Every step will be documented and approved by both sides. After several tense moments, Tyrell nodded. Very well. We will permit human engineers aboard our vessels, but we expect full consultation on all modifications. Nothing happens without our approval. Agreed, Joe said. Dr. Lazarus, coordinate with the Valdorian technical teams. Time is critical. Let's not waste another minute. Within hours, mixed crews of humans and Valdorians swarmed through the Confederate ships. Kithrak watched as they installed manual override levers, backup targeting systems, and hardwired command circuits that would resist any attempt at digital subversion. The sight of advanced Valdorian engineers working side by side with humans wielding basic tools was strange, but somehow hopeful. Maybe this unlikely partnership would be enough to turn the tide. He noticed some of the Valdorian crew members already starting to relax around their human counterparts, even sharing jokes about going retro with the modifications. Days passed in a blur of relentless work. The Valdorian fleet, once paralyzed by its own technological sophistication, was being transformed. Human engineers, with their strange mix of brute force problem-solving and battlefield pragmatism, guided their Valdorian counterparts in adapting to a new way of war. Kithrak watched his people struggle at first, but slowly, with each successful test, the doubt in their eyes began to fade. In the makeshift retrofit bay, Kithrak watched human and Valdorian engineers working side by side on a cruiser's exposed control systems. The air buzzed with tension and the clash of different working styles. Tools clattered against metal floors while voices echoed off the high ceiling in a mix of languages. Careful with that circuit board, a Valdorian engineer snapped at his human counterpart, his scaled fingers twitching with nerves. That's worth more than your entire ship. Dr. Lazarus stepped in smoothly, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. And soon it'll be worth even more, because it'll actually work against the Drachnids. He gave the Valdorian a friendly pat on the shoulder that made him jump. Commander Delgado paced nearby, keeping a watchful eye. Her boots clicked against the deck plates in a steady rhythm. Her expression softened as she noticed a young Valdorian officer climbing into a maintenance shaft to manually install backup controls, a task that would have been beneath their station days ago. She nodded approvingly at the sight. You know, Kithrak said quietly to Lazarus, watching the organized chaos around them. I used to think humans were nothing but violent primitives. The way you solved problems with physical force instead of AI assistance, it seemed barbaric. He flexed his own hands, now dirty from helping with repairs. Lazarus smiled while adjusting some wiring. We knew something like this might happen, not the Drachnids specifically, but a threat that could turn advanced tech against itself. That's why we kept one foot in the analog world. He yanked a wire free with his teeth, making Kithrak wince. You planned for this? The Federation never stopped preparing. We made our ships look like merchants, but we kept training, kept our backup systems simple, mechanical, real. He tapped the exposed panel meaningfully. Sometimes old school is the best school. A Valdorian engineer called out in surprise as she successfully fired up a manual targeting system, the display glowing with a warm green light. Delgado walked over, offering genuine praise. Nice work. You're catching on fast. It's different, the engineer admitted, running her fingers over the manual controls. But I'm starting to see the logic behind it. Hours later, they gathered in the control room for the first full systems test. Sweat beaded on foreheads, both human and alien. Kithrak held his breath as they initiated the startup sequence. The cruiser's engines hummed to life, its new hybrid systems working in perfect harmony. The deck vibrated slightly under their feet. All stations report ready, a Valdorian officer announced, pride creeping into his voice. He sat straighter in his chair, scales gleaming under the emergency lights. Before they could celebrate, the deep space sensors lit up with multiple contacts. Red warning lights bathed the control room in an eerie glow. The Drachnids were back, and this time they'd brought an army. The moment the final modifications were completed, alarms blared across every ship. Long-range sensors detected a new wave of Drachnid ships, larger, more numerous, and heading straight for the Valdorian core worlds. As crews rushed to battle stations, Cuthrack realized the true test of their new alliance had arrived. The massive Drachnid fleet filled the view screen, thousands of ships stretching across the darkness of space. Admiral Jo stood firm on the bridge, her face lit by the glow of tactical displays. "All ships battle formations," she commanded. "Remember your training. Trust your human partners." Cuthrack watched from his station as the combined fleet moved into position. Retrofitted Valdorian cruisers flew alongside human warships, their crews working together despite centuries of mistrust. The first wave of Drachnid ships struck like a hammer. Energy weapons lit up space as AI-driven vessels crashed against the defensive line. But this time, the defenders were ready. "Manual targeting engaged," called out a Valdorian gunner, "just like the humans showed us." Commander Delgado's voice crackled over the comm. "Assault teams, launch now, while they're focused on the main fleet." Small armored pods shot out from the human ships, each piloted by hand. The Drachnid AI struggled to track them, expecting automated attack patterns but finding none. On her command platform, Counselor Tyrell gripped the railing as she watched the battle unfold. Her face showed growing shock as human tactics proved devastatingly effective. "Impossible," she whispered. "They're primitive methods. They're working." Delgado's voice cut through the chaos again. First command ship breached, setting charges now. The massive Drachnid vessel erupted from within, its AI core destroyed by human boarders. More followed as the assault teams struck target after target, but victory came at a cost. "We've lost the Defiant," someone shouted. "Intrepid is breaking apart." Admiral Jo's voice remained steady. "Hold the line. We knew the price." The battle raged on, neither side willing to yield. The combined fleet fought with everything they had, human courage matched with Valdorian technology, creating something neither side could achieve alone. "The Drachnids are pulling back," Cuthrack reported, studying his displays. "Their losses are too heavy to justify continuing the assault." Tyrell sank into her chair, the weight of revelation heavy on her shoulders. "We would be dead without them," she admitted quietly. "Without these humans we thought beneath us." The fleet regrouped, counting their losses. Destroyed ships drifted in the void, both human and Valdorian. But they had held. For now. The Drachnids had retreated, but victory had come at a terrible cost. The Valdorian capital burned beneath the shattered remains of orbital platforms, and the surviving fleet was battered and exhausted. Even as medical crews worked tirelessly to save the wounded, Federation intelligence intercepted a chilling transmission, proof that the Drachnids were already planning their next, far more devastating attack. The medical bay of Frontier's Edge was chaos. Dr. Lazarus moved swiftly between beds, his hands steady despite hours of non-stop work. Burned and broken bodies, human and Valdorian alike, filled every available space. "I need more plasma synthesizers," he called out, "and get me those regeneration packs." Cuthrack helped carry in another wounded Valdorian officer, the alien's normally iridescent skin dull with shock. "Doctor, her life signs are failing." "Put her here," Lazarus said, gesturing to an empty bed. His eyes were red-rimmed from exhaustion. "Hold on, friend. We've got you." On the bridge, Diplomat Adisa burst through the doors, her tablet clutched tight. "Admiral, we've decoded a Drachnid transmission." Jo turned from her tactical display. "Report." They see all other species as resources, living materials to be harvested or enslaved. There's no reasoning with them, no peaceful solution." Commander Delgado's face hardened. "Monsters." From a nearby screen, Counselor Tyrell watched with growing horror as Adisa played the transmission. The Drachnid message was cold, methodical, discussing the processing of captured worlds with the emotion of a grocery list. Admiral Joe straightened her uniform and walked to the communication station. Open a system-wide channel. Her voice rang clear across every ship, every station, every colony and range. To all forces, human and Valdorian, you've seen what these creatures do. You know what they want. The Confederation broke their own peace treaty by letting these monsters into our space. A small, fierce smile crossed her face. Perfect. Now we can stop pretending. She pressed a button, and her transmission reached further, beyond the battle zone, past the old treaty lines, straight to Earth itself. This is Admiral Reese Joe to all human Federation territories. Full mobilization is now in effect. I repeat, full mobilization is authorized. Every ship, every volunteer, every resource we have. Send them all. The time for hiding our strength is over. Within minutes, the responses began flooding in. Colony ships revealing hidden weapon systems, merchant vessels dropping their civilian facades, mining installations converting to munitions factories. The humans were finally showing their true face, not as barbarians, but as defenders. It took less than an hour for Admiral Joe's emergency order to reach every corner of human space. The response was immediate. Across the Federation, seemingly ordinary ships shed their disguises, revealing hidden weapons and armor. Merchant freighters were retrofitted into warships, colonial defense forces mobilized, and deep space installations activated long-dormant military protocols. Humanity had spent decades preparing for a war they never wanted, but now they would not hold back. Admiral Joe stood before a sea of faces in the Frontier's Edge's main briefing hall. Newly arrived human captains filled the rows, their uniforms bearing patches from every corner of Federation space. Kithrak watched from his observation post, taking in the sheer variety of humanity on display. Mars Defense Squadron reporting, a stocky captain announced. Europa Deep Space ready for orders, called another. Titan Mining Corps conversion fleet standing by, a third declared. The reports kept coming. Colony ships turned battle cruisers, mining vessels refitted with weapon systems, cargo haulers transformed into troop carriers. Kithrak's mandibles twitched in astonishment as he documented the true scope of human military power. On the main display, Counselor Tyrell's image showed barely contained shock. This is impossible. Your treaty allowed fleet strength was a fraction of this. Commander Delgado couldn't help but smirk. Those were just the ships we let you see, Counselor. Dr. Lazarus stepped forward, pointing to the tactical display. Every ship here has been specially modified, hardened against electronic warfare, manual overrides for all critical systems. The Drachnids won't find us such easy prey. Admiral Joe raised her hand for silence. The Drachnids expected to face the Confederation's automated defenses. Instead, they'll meet the combined might of humanity's ingenuity and Valdorian technology. She highlighted a sector on the map. Their staging area is here. They've grown overconfident, thinking they've broken our will to fight. We'll hit them from multiple vectors, Delgado added. Earth pattern ships from above the orbital plane, Mars squadrons from below. Colony forces will sweep in from the sides. Kithrak watched Tyrell's expression shift from doubt to cautious hope as Joe detailed the counteroffensive. The plan was bold, aggressive. Everything the Confederation had feared about humanity now turned to their advantage. Together, Joe concluded, we're going to push these monsters back into their own territory, show them what happens when they mistake patience for weakness. The assembled captains rose as one, their dedication palpable. Kithrak felt a strange pride watching these supposed barbarians unite to defend his people. These weren't the savages of Confederation propaganda. These were warriors with purpose, defenders with heart. All ships prepare for jump coordinates, Joe commanded. We move on the staging area within the hour. As the newly assembled human fleet completed its final preparations, Valdorian officers stood alongside their human counterparts, watching in awe. The sheer scale of the mobilization was unlike anything they had ever seen. Training drills intensified. Valdorians learning to fight without AI assistance. Humans refining their already battle-hardened instincts. And looming on the horizon, the Drachnid fleet waited, preparing their final desperate stand. Commander Delgado stood in the weapons control room of a Valdorian cruiser, watching the alien crew fumble with the newly installed manual targeting systems. Their long fingers, used to dancing across holographic interfaces, struggled with physical controls. Again, she ordered not unkindly. Remember, when the AI goes dark, you'll need muscle memory. A Valdorian captain named Varek gripped the targeting stick, his frustration evident. This is primitive. Primitive works, Delgado said. Primitive can't be hacked. Dr. Lazarus monitored their vital signs from a corner terminal. Their stress levels are actually dropping with each successful hit, he noted. They're adapting faster than expected. The targeting drill continued. Red lights flashed, simulating a complete systems failure. Varek's hands stayed steady this time. His shot struck the holographic target dead center. Well done, Delgado said. A hint of pride crept into her voice. Kithrak entered the control room, datapad in hand. He watched his fellow Valdorians working with the manual systems, their initial disdain giving way to cautious respect. Commander, Kithrak said, approaching Delgado, I need to thank you for what you did at the outpost, saving our people when you had no obligation to do so. Delgado turned to face him. There's always an obligation to help others, she said quietly. That's something I wish more aliens understood about us. We're not warriors because we love fighting. We're warriors because sometimes you need to fight to protect what matters. I'm beginning to understand that, Kithrak admitted. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent message from intelligence. Dr. Lazarus read it aloud, his face growing grim. Long-range scouts confirm multiple Drachnid reinforcement fleets entering the sector. They're pulling forces from their core worlds. How long? Delgado asked. Days, maybe less. The training room fell silent. Varek and the other Valdorian officers exchanged worried glances. Then we drill harder, Delgado said firmly. Every shot counts. They worked through the night cycle, human instructors and Valdorian crews pushing themselves to the limit. When the final drill ended, proximity alarms blared throughout the ship. The Allied fleet had arrived at their destination. Through the observation windows they saw them, hundreds of Drachnid capital ships, their massive forms blocking out the light of the system's central star. The final battle began before either side could exchange words. Drachnid dreadnoughts fired the first salvo, their weapons tearing through space in bright, deadly arcs. The Allied fleet surged forward, Valdorian ships bolstered by human tactical ingenuity. As the first waves of human boarders launched toward the enemy flagship, the fate of both species hung in the balance. From the command deck of the human flagship, Admiral Joe watched the massive battle unfold across multiple tactical displays. Hundreds of ships, human and Valdorian alike, engaged the Drachnid fleet in a dazzling array of weapons fire and coordinated maneuvers. Drachnid electronic warfare detected, called out a sensor officer. They're trying to jam our command channels. Joe allowed herself a small smile. Let them try. All ships switch to backup frequencies, just like we drilled. Kithrak observed from his station as human crews smoothly transitioned to alternative systems. No panic, no hesitation. Where Valdorian ships would have been paralyzed, the human fleet barely missed a beat. Boarding teams in position, Commander Delgado's voice crackled over the comm. Ready to breach the dreadnought. Execute, Joe ordered. Delgado's strike team burst from their assault pods, using manual cutting tools to slice through the Drachnid hull. Inside, they moved with practiced efficiency through corridors filled with scrambled defense systems. Their internal security is blind, Delgado reported. They relied too heavily on automated responses, moving toward the core. Diplomat Adisa monitored the broader communications channels coordinating between species. Valdorian battle group Takal reports successful penetration of enemy lines using the modified weapons systems. Kathrak felt a surge of pride as he watched his people's ships, now equipped with human redundancies, punch through Drachnid formations. The supposedly primitive modifications had transformed the Valdorian vessels into effective fighting machines. Core charges set, Delgado transmitted, falling back to extraction points. Minutes later, the massive Drachnid dreadnought erupted from within. The explosion created a gap in their defense line, and more Allied ships poured through. The enemy flagship is withdrawing, Kathrak announced, tracking its movement. They're falling back behind their escort screen. They're not done yet, Joe said grimly, watching the Drachnid forces regroup around their command ship. All units hold position and maintain combat readiness. The Drachnid fleet was broken, but their final contingency plan threatened to undo everything. Federation intelligence had decrypted their last desperate order, activation of the Nova Catalyst. If deployed, the weapon would trigger an artificial supernova, wiping out the entire system. As the remnants of the Drachnid armada reformed around their flagship, Admiral Joe knew there was only one choice left. They had to end this, now. Admiral Joe studied the tactical display as Dr. Lazarus's voice crackled over the comm. Medical bay at full capacity. We're treating everyone we can, human and Valdorian alike. Through the video feed, Joe watched Kathrak working alongside human medics, his long fingers carefully applying pressure bandages to a wounded human ensign while giving calm instructions to a Valdorian nurse treating plasma burns on a Federation Marine. Their differences mean nothing now, Diplomat Adisa said softly from her station. Pain and courage look the same in any species. She paused, her fingers flying over her console. Admiral, I've managed to partially decrypt their command traffic. The encryption was complex, but their arrogance made them sloppy. Joe turned. What have you found? Adisa's face paled. They're preparing something called a Nova Catalyst. From what I can piece together, it's designed to trigger artificial supernovas. If we push them too far, they'll use it on the nearest star. Billions would die. Kathrak's voice came through tight with horror. The blast wave would destroy everything in this sector. Counselor Terrell's hologram flickered to life on the bridge. We cannot allow them time to deploy such a weapon. But a direct assault. She paused, her usual diplomatic facade cracking. The losses would be catastrophic. Joe stood at the center of her bridge, feeling the weight of countless lives in her next decision. She could try to negotiate, buy time, but the Drachnids had shown no interest in true diplomacy. Every moment they delayed gave the enemy more time to prepare their superweapon. They're counting on our conscience, Joe said quietly. They think we'll hesitate, try to talk. That's what the Valdorians would have done before. She looked at Kathrak. But we're not just Valdorians anymore, are we? No, Kathrak agreed, his voice firm despite the exhaustion. We are something new, something stronger. Joe opened a fleet-wide channel. All ships, this is Admiral Joe. The enemy has a super weapon that could kill billions. We have one chance to stop them. She took a deep breath. I won't hide the cost. This assault will be brutal. But if we don't strike now, countless innocent lives will be lost. Terrell's hologram straightened. The Valdorian fleet stands with you, Admiral. Whatever comes. All ships, Joe commanded, her voice ringing with authority. Battle formations. We strike in 3 minutes. May whatever gods you believe in watch over us all. The combined fleet began moving into position, weapons charging, every crew member knowing these might be their final moments. But there was no hesitation. Human and Valdorian alike, they advanced toward the Drachnid stronghold as one united force. The final engagement was unlike any battle fought before. Human and Valdorian ships weaved together in a deadly ballet, their mixed tactics confusing the Drachnid AI. On the surface of the enemy flagship, small strike teams, comprised of both species, fought their way to the superweapons core. If they failed, millions would die. If they succeeded, the war would end. Admiral Joe's voice cut through the tense silence on the bridge. All units, commence Operation Thunderstrike. She turned to Kathrak, who stood rigid beside her. Your people's ships are in position? Yes, Admiral. Though many still doubt this plan will work. The massive view screen showed hundreds of Allied vessels, sleek Valdorian cruisers mixed with sturdy human warships, moving into attack formation. At the center of their target zone loomed the Drachnid flagship, its superweapon glowing with ominous energy. Commander Delgado's voice crackled over the comm. Boarding teams ready, Admiral. We've got 20 mixed squads, human marines and Valdorian volunteers. The diversion force is standing by, Diplomat Adisa reported, her usual calm voice tight with tension. Captain Martinez and 3 Valdorian cruisers are prepared to draw their fire. Joe nodded grimly. Begin the assault. All ships open fire. The space between the fleets erupted in a dazzling display of weapons fire. Martinez's small group charged ahead, their ships weaving through the barrage. The Drachnid defenders turned to face this apparent main thrust, their AI predictably focusing on the most obvious threat. Now, Commander, Joe ordered. Delgado's assault pods shot from their launch tubes, small enough to slip through the chaos. Dr. Lazarus's voice came through. Remember, teams, stick to the manual overrides. No fancy tech. They can't hack what isn't there. Kathrak watched in amazement as the pods reached the Drachnid hull. Such a primitive approach, and yet... The battle intensified. Martinez's diversion force took heavy damage, but they kept fighting. On the tactical display, dots representing Delgado's boarding teams penetrated deeper into the enemy flagship. They're at the weapon core, Adisa reported. Drachnid internal defenses are confused by the mixed biosignatures. Their AI can't process our combined tactics, Kathrak realized. We're too unpredictable together. Delgado's voice breathless. Charges set. But we've got heavy resistance, losing people. All ships concentrate fire on their port section, Joe commanded. Give our people cover. The Allied fleet responded instantly. Human gunners working alongside Valdorian crews, their combined fire overwhelming the Drachnid shields. The diversion squadron, though badly damaged, pressed their attack. Detonation in 10 seconds, Delgado shouted. Everyone out! A massive explosion blossomed from within the Drachnid flagship. The superweapon's glow flickered and died. Secondary explosions chained through the massive vessel. Get our people out, Joe ordered. Recovery teams, move in. The remaining Drachnid ships, their coordinated defense shattered, began jumping away in panic. The superweapon threat was eliminated, and with it, the Drachnid's last hope of victory. Hours after the final explosion signaled the Drachnid's defeat, the battlefield lay in eerie silence. Wreckage drifted in space, fires burned on planetary surfaces, and the survivors of both species stood side by side, no longer just allies but something greater. As the first official words of a new alliance were spoken, Kathrak recorded the moment for history. They had feared humanity's strength. Now, they had seen its true power, not in war, but in the will to protect. Kathrak sat at his desk, his fingers moving across the datapad as he recorded his final report to the Confederation Council. In our arrogance, we thought we understood humanity. We labeled them as barbaric warriors to be contained. The truth proved far more complex and far more inspiring. He paused, watching through his viewport as human and Valdorian crews worked together to repair battle damage. Dr. Lazarus was teaching Valdorian medics how to perform emergency procedures without AI assistance. The sight brought an unexpected warmth to his hearts. Their strength lies not in weapons but in their remarkable ability to adapt, cooperate, and face challenges head-on. When the Drachnids threatened us, humanity didn't hesitate. They revealed decades of careful preparation, not for conquest, but for protection. In the main conference chamber, Counselor Tyrell stood before Admiral Joe and Diplomat Adisa. Her voice carried none of its former condescension. "We were wrong about your people," Tyrell admitted. "The Confederation formally requests an equal alliance with the Human Federation, not as superior beings granting favor, but as partners who hope to learn from each other." Adisa's smile was warm as she extended her hand in the human gesture of agreement. "Together, we can build something greater than either of us could achieve alone." On the bridge of her flagship, Admiral Joe addressed the combined fleet. Her words echoed across every ship, human and Valdorian alike. "The Drachnids aren't gone forever, but they learned something today, that the species of this galaxy won't stand alone. We're stronger together. Different approaches, different cultures, but united in our desire to protect each other and maintain peace." Commander Delgado, bandaged but standing proud, nodded in agreement as she watched crews of both species working side by side on repairs. Kithrak finished his report with steady hands. "We sought to contain humanity. They were already prepared to protect us, and themselves, a warrior shield forged by centuries of survival, tempered by a desire for peace." Through his viewport, he watched human and Valdorian ships flying in joint patrol formations, their crews already learning to work as one. If you enjoyed the story of Jonathan, I hand-picked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.